The rain hadn't stopped for hours. Sheets of water lashed against the windshield of Evelyn Moore's borrowed Buick as she navigated the winding back roads of Vermont. It was supposed to be a simple drive from Montpellier to her aunt's cottage near the Canadian border, but the map had lied, or perhaps she had taken a wrong turn somewhere between East Calais and nowhere. Her headlights struggled against the darkness, casting shaky beams through the mist, until the engine gave a sputtering cough and died on a stretch of unpaved road. She sat in stunned silence, the heater blowing cold, the wipers smearing raindrops into blurry streaks. She cursed under her breath, grabbed her coat and stepped into the storm. The landscape was a patchwork of skeletal trees and shadowed hills. A flash of lightning revealed something through the curtain of rain. A house, barely visible, half shrouded by forest and fog, less than a quarter-mile away. Victorian in structure, tall and narrow, it looked abandoned at first glance, but the warm flicker of a candlelight glow in one of the upper windows gave her hope. She climbed the slippery dirt path, boots squelching in the mud. Thunder cracked overhead as she knocked once, twice, then a third time on the heavy wooden door. It opened with a groan. A man stood in the doorway, tall, lean, and dressed in a worn black cassock. His silver hair was neatly combed, his eyes pale and sunken, like porcelain marbles half buried in snow. He regarded her without surprise, as though he had been expecting a knock all along. "I'm sorry," Evelyn began, breathless. "My car died. The storm. Do you have a phone I can use?" The man stepped aside without a word and gestured for her to enter. The inside of the house was surprisingly warm. Oil lamps flickered along the walls, casting shadows on dusty bookshelves and faded wallpaper. Religious icons adorned the space, crosses above door frames, portraits of saints with eyes that followed. She smelled wood smoke and something subtler beneath it, lavender maybe, or something older. "You're welcome to wait out the storm here," the man said finally, voice dry as parchment. "I'm Father Alcott." "Evelyn Moore," she replied, setting down her wet coat. "Thank you, Father." "I don't mean to intrude." He nodded, motioning her toward a chair near the hearth. A fire crackled weakly there, offering little light but much-needed heat. "You won't find a phone here," he added. "The line's been dead since the spring thaw." Evelyn frowned. "Is there a town nearby?" "Not for miles." The silence that followed was thick. She listened to the rain hammering the roof, the creak of the house settling around them. Father Alcott returned with a cup of tea, black, unsweetened, and took a seat across from her. For long minutes, they simply sat. "Do many people pass through here?" she asked, hoping to break the tension. "Not since 1937. He didn't elaborate. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, her curiosity already stirring. Something about the place, the shadows, the chill that lingered even near the fire, put her on edge. It wasn't fear, not exactly, more like anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She glanced upward. Somewhere above them, a faint, creaking sound echoed through the ceiling. A footstep? Or just the wind? Father Alcott said nothing. "Before we go further, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more haunting tales like this one." What Evelyn found in that house would change her forever, and what lay above the ceiling had waited long enough. The rain didn't stop. Neither did the story. The storm stretched into the next morning. Evelyn awoke on a narrow sofa beneath a heavy wool blanket, her clothes still damp but no longer cold. A pale grey light filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor. The rain had dulled to a steady patter, but thunder still rolled in the distance like a beast circling its den. She stretched, her back stiff from the uneven cushions. The house was quiet. No voices, no footsteps, only the rhythmic ticking of an ornate clock on the mantel. Father Alcott was nowhere to be seen. She wandered into the hallway, guided by curiosity more than intent. The air in the house was heavy, not with dust, but with a sense of long-standing silence. Every creak of the floor beneath her feet seemed amplified, as though the house resented being disturbed. Portraits lined the hallway, black and white photos of solemn faces, unsmiling men and women dressed in old-fashioned garb. Their eyes, though still, seemed to watch her as she passed. At the end of the hall, a staircase led upward. Evelyn hesitated at the base. She remembered the sound from the night before, something overhead, slow and deliberate, a shifting weight. Her fingers brushed the banister. She climbed. The upper floor was dimmer, the windows smaller and more tightly shuttered. She moved quietly, peeking into rooms as she passed. One with a crucifix above a narrow bed, another filled with dusty furniture and stacked trunks. She paused at a door at the end of the hall. It looked different, heavier, older. The doorknob was ornate brass, worn to a dull gleam. She turned it. Locked. She leaned in, pressing her ear against the wood. No sound, just the faint scent of something dry and aged. Cedar and paper, maybe. She jiggled the knob again, then stepped back. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned sharply. Nothing. The hall was empty. When she returned downstairs, Father Alcott was in the kitchen, sipping something from a tin cup. "You went upstairs," he said without looking at her. "I heard something last night," she replied. "It sounded like footsteps." He stirred his drink slowly. "Old houses groan, wood swells. The wind pulls at corners, you'll hear things." "But the attic," she continued. "It was locked." At that he did look at her. His expression didn't shift much, but something tightened behind his eyes. "That door stays closed," he said simply. "Why?" He didn't answer. Evelyn waited, but he returned to his drink as if the conversation had ended. She sensed that pushing further wouldn't help. Instead, she nodded, accepted a slice of toast he offered, and let the silence return. The rest of the day passed slowly. The rain never quite stopped. Evelyn spent hours reading from a bookshelf in the sitting room, thumbing through cracked spines and yellowed pages. Religious texts, journals, sermons. One slim volume was blank, except for a name written in delicate cursive on the inside cover, Margaret Hale. There was no other writing, just her name. No date. No indication of who she had been. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The fire had gone out in the hearth and the silence of the house had shifted again. It wasn't peaceful. It was too controlled, too even, as if the house had no natural sounds left, as if it were listening. She heard the creak again, the one from the attic. It was slower this time and closer to the stairs. A footstep, then another, each one deliberate, impossibly patient. She sat up in the dark, her heart thudding. Then, silence. She lay back down, staring into the darkness above her. Something about the locked attic stirred more than curiosity now. It felt like the kind of place that didn't just store things, it remembered them, and it was waiting. The next morning, Evelyn awoke with a start. She had dreamed of footsteps, endless footsteps circling just above her. They didn't run or wander, they waited. Sunlight, pale and weak, filtered through the curtains. The rain had paused, leaving behind a mist that clung to the windows like breath on glass. She dressed quickly, her thoughts pulled toward the attic door. She hadn't heard Father Alcott stir. A part of her hoped he was still asleep. The stairs creaked beneath her weight. When she reached the attic landing, she noticed the air felt colder, as if the chill had settled here like dust, and the door no longer locked. The brass knob turned easily beneath her hand. Inside, the attic stretched wide and dim, filled with old trunks, covered furniture, and the scent of dry parchment and mothballs. A single window allowed a shaft of light to cut through the shadows. Dust floated like tiny ghosts in the air. Everything was still. Evelyn stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the clutter. There were no footsteps in the dust, no trail to follow. She wandered, careful not to disturb more than necessary. Then she saw it, on top of a weathered cedar chest, almost glowing in the weak light. A leather-bound journal, its spine cracked, the corners softened by time. She picked it up gently. The cover was unmarked, but inside, on the first page, the same name appeared as in the slim volume from the bookshelf, Margaret Hale. The handwriting was elegant, measured, inked in a careful hand that betrayed both restraint and urgency. She began to read. October 4th, 1936. I am not mad. Not yet. But the house, this house, it doesn't forget. And it doesn't forgive. The journal chronicled Margaret's descent into something between fear and desperation. She had lived in this house nearly 30 years earlier. According to her words, Father Alcott had known her well, though their relationship was never defined. She spoke of secrets buried beneath silence, of confessions whispered and never absolved. There are voices in the walls, she wrote, not always words, but they know my name, and I believe they know what I did. The entries grew shorter, more fragmented. There were mentions of the attic, of something hidden and locked away. She began writing only at night when the air turns and the floor breathes. One entry repeated the same sentence 3 times. Do not let the priest speak my name. Evelyn's hands trembled. She flipped to the last page. It was torn halfway down the middle, as if someone had tried to remove it in haste. The remaining fragment read only, "He said it in the dark. He said it even though I begged him not to. If you're reading this, nothing more." A noise behind her made her whirl around. Just the house settling, or not. She tucked the journal beneath her arm and descended the stairs, heart pounding. In the hallway, Father Alcott stood motionless by the grandfather clock. He said nothing as she passed, but his eyes followed her all the way to the sitting room. There she sat, opened the journal again and stared at the name. Margaret Hale. Who was she really? Why did the priest hold power over her memory, or her soul? She looked up and found Father Alcott still there, silent, unmoving. "I found something," she said, voice steady. "I know," he replied. Evelyn held up the journal. Who was she? For a moment his expression didn't change. Then something flickered. Regret, perhaps, or recognition too old to be fresh. "She was lost," he said quietly, "and some things are meant to stay lost." The fire had gone out. The room felt colder than before. Evelyn closed the journal slowly, her fingers lingering on its cover. She didn't believe in ghosts, but the house did. The candle flickered low in the confessional. Margaret Hale sat behind the wooden screen, her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white. She had not spoken a word since entering. Outside, the evening wind carried the scent of rain and turned the chapel's stained glass shadows into trembling things. Father Alcott waited patiently on the other side, the silence between them stretching too long. "You may speak," he said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever burdens you, God hears." Margaret inhaled through her nose. Her voice came like cracked porcelain. "I buried it." The priest said nothing. The ticking of the chapel's old wall clock filled the void. "Not a person," she added quickly, as if absolving herself before the worst could be imagined. "Not yet." A long pause. "Go on," Alcott said. Margaret's voice grew sharper, tinged with something close to fear. "I don't know if it was mine to begin with. I found it, something like a relic, deep in the woods beyond the well, wrapped in cloth, old cloth, tied with bone." The priest stirred. "Where?" "Behind the hollow tree, the one split by lightning." He exhaled slowly as though he had hoped never to hear those words again. "You touched it." "I had to," she said. "It called to me. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't a voice. Not at first. Just wait." Something inside me moved, as if it had always been there, waiting. "What did you do with it?" "I brought it home. Hid it in the attic. For weeks I couldn't sleep. It began to change, shift. I don't mean physically, I mean in the air. In me, my thoughts." Father Alcott gripped his rosary tightly. "It whispered." That's when I realized it wasn't an object. It was a promise. "To whom?" She hesitated. Then, in a voice smaller than before, "To the soil, to the house, to the name I was born with." The priest stood. "You should not have disturbed it." Margaret rose to meet him, face pale, eyes wide. "But I had to. Something about it, about that place. It ties to the town, to my family. I saw them, Father. In dreams, all of them standing in the field where the chapel now stands, chanting." Alcott walked away from the booth and emerged into the sanctuary, where candles burned before the altar. Margaret followed, the weight of what she carried bleeding into the silence between them. "Do you remember what you said to me when we first met?" she asked him. He turned slowly. "That no soul is beyond redemption." "You lied." His gaze didn't falter. "I was speaking to a woman, not a wound." Margaret's eyes burned. "You knew what this land held," she said. "You knew what they did. And you said nothing. You let it stay buried. You let it grow. I was trying to contain it. You were trying to forget it." She stepped closer. "I'm going to undo it." Alcott's voice turned cold. "You don't understand what will come." "I don't care." The candles dimmed as if a gust passed through, though no wind moved. The church seemed to breathe inward. "There are names we are never meant to speak," Alcott said. Margaret pulled a small object from her coat, wrapped in frayed cloth, edges stained dark. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm asking for silence. I want you to swear to me, Father. Whatever happens, you must never say my name again." He stared at the bundle, then at her. She trembled, not from fear, but resolve. The kind that cracked marble. "Swear it." Alcott bowed his head. His lips moved, but no sound came. Margaret turned and left the chapel, and outside the rain finally began. The house had changed. It was subtle at first, the way the floors no longer creaked beneath Evelyn's feet, as if they had grown cautious. The quiet no longer felt like peace. It felt like something holding its breath. She spent the morning trying to distract herself. The journal of Margaret Hale remained hidden beneath her suitcase. She hadn't dared to read more. Not yet. In the hallway, she passed Father Alcott. He offered no greeting, just a nod, thin and distant, as if they shared a memory they hadn't lived. Later in the study, she examined the shelves again. Books of scripture, sermons, genealogy records. One volume caught her eye, leather-bound with a faded gold cross on the cover. Inside, instead of prayers or sermons, she found pressed flowers and bits of parchment scribbled with names. Many were scratched out, some repeated. Margaret Hale. She froze. Her breath fogged the page as a chill swept the room. She closed the book quickly, the air somehow colder than before. She touched the back of her neck and felt it. Fingers, icy, brief but unmistakable. She turned, heart racing. Nothing. She stood alone in the study, the door ajar, the light slanting just so. Her breath returned slowly. She told herself it was imagination, nerves, that she was filling the silence with ghosts, but she knew better. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters like bones against wood. She lay on the couch, blanket pulled to her chin, every muscle tense. The fire had died down, but she didn't dare rise to stoke it. Then came the sound, a soft dragging across the floor upstairs. Not footsteps this time, something slower, heavier. She held her breath, and then another sound, closer, a whisper. Not words, just breath, cold air brushing against her ear like a warning. She sat up sharply, her skin prickled, her throat dry. "Who's there?" she whispered, though she already knew she wouldn't get an answer. The house replied with silence. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she rose and went to the kitchen. Father Alcott was there, already seated with a teacup in hand, as though he hadn't moved since the night before. His expression was unreadable. "You heard it," he said. She didn't bother denying it. "I felt something," she replied. "It touched me." "You've read the journal?" It wasn't a question. Evelyn nodded. "She begged you not to say her name. You did, didn't you?" He looked into his cup. "Once. Only once. What happened?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked to the sink, pouring out the cold tea as if it mattered. "There are forces that listen in this house," he said. "They don't speak in language. They speak in pressure, in dreams, in touch." She said the house remembers. It does. She waited, but he didn't elaborate. Later that day, Evelyn wandered through the lower hall, trying to make sense of the strange layout of the house. Behind one of the old curtains, she found a small wooden door, barely 4 feet tall. She knelt and opened it slowly. It led to a narrow crawl space lined with stone and packed dirt. The air inside was freezing. Something about the space called to her, a whisper in her spine. Not a voice, just an impression. She shut the door and stood quickly. That night she sat again by the fire. The journal lay on her lap, closed. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Instead, she traced the name on the cover with her fingertip. Margaret Hale. The touch she had felt wasn't the wind. It hadn't been imagined. It had been deliberate. And it would return. The wind carried stories long before words. In 1859, the town of Duval's Hollow was little more than a handful of farmsteads, clustered between the forest and the cold breath of the mountains. Crops failed that year, not from drought or blight, but from something no one could name. Fields withered, livestock refused to breed. Babies were born and died the same week, with no cause the doctors could explain. The townspeople prayed, and when prayer failed, they turned inward, toward older rites, buried under layers of Christian repentance, but never forgotten. At the center of town stood a modest wooden chapel, its steeple crooked from a lightning strike decades earlier. Beneath it, a gathering was called. 8 families. Heads of households, all of them pale with hunger, eyes like dried seeds. Among them stood Elias Hale, great-grandfather of Margaret, a man of rigid conviction and sharper silence. He held in his hand a ledger. Inside were the names of every child born that year. One name was circled. "She's not strong," someone whispered. "She won't live to the winter." "It must be voluntary," said another. The silence that followed was long and suffocating. Then Elias Hale spoke for the first time in hours. "I'll do it," gasps rippled through the group. "You mean your own kin?" He nodded. She's marked already. We all saw the signs. The crow at her window, the blood in the basin. Murmurs turned to prayers, then to silence once more. 3 nights later, under a moon half hidden by smoke and storm, the child was brought to the chapel, not in a cradle, but in a woven basket lined with salt. Her eyes were open, watching. They called it a pact. Elias knelt before the altar and placed her beneath it. A circle was drawn with ash and lamb's blood. A name, never spoken aloud, was etched into the floorboards. And the bell rang once, though no one had pulled its rope. From that night on, the fields turned green again. The cows calved, children survived. But the pact was never written, only remembered. The next spring, the townspeople rebuilt the chapel with stone. They built it taller, stronger. A bell tower was raised with timber from the cursed grove. At its peak, they placed a cross. Inside, buried beneath layers of mortar and prayer, they sealed the ledger, and they never spoke of it again. The Hales kept the chapel keys. The priest who oversaw the town's flock was chosen not by the diocese, but by the pact's silent terms. He was to listen, never lead. Each new priest was told the same words upon arrival: keep the name silent, guard the bell tower, and never enter the crawl space beneath the altar. The years passed, and so did the generations, but the land remembered. It remembered the blood, the oath, the name. And when Margaret was born, with a birthmark shaped like a crescent on her collarbone, some of the older women began to whisper. She was the last of her line, and the soil was growing restless again. In the winter of 1936, the ground froze early. Crops turned black beneath the frost. A stillbirth struck the apothecary's wife. Then another. Dogs howled for days, and someone saw a crow return to the same window, Margaret's. But she did not run. Instead, she walked into the woods, past the hollow tree, and returned with something wrapped in old cloth. The pact had been broken. Or perhaps it had simply come full circle. Back in 1963, Evelyn felt the weight of the journal pressing against her chest as she sat beside the dead fire. She hadn't read this far yet, but the house had. She could feel it watching her. The map inside Margaret's journal was drawn with a shaking hand. Faint lines marked a path from the chapel to the edge of the woods, and from there, a thin trail led to a symbol Evelyn couldn't decipher. A circle within another, crossed through once. Beneath it, a single word. Well. That morning, Evelyn left the house without telling Father Alcott. The sky hung low and grey, the kind of colourless day that smothered sound. She followed the road until the pavement gave way to gravel, and gravel gave way to soft earth and roots. The woods were quiet. No birds, no breeze. Just the crunch of her boots and the growing sense that something unseen was watching. She found the well hidden behind a tangle of brambles. It was older than the trees around it, made of rough stone and moss, the circular mouth lined with black lichen. The bucket was long gone, the rope frayed and severed. The opening gaped like a throat waiting to swallow. She stepped closer. As she leaned in, the air turned sharp and metallic like iron and forgotten rain. She expected echoes, but instead, what rose from the well wasn't sound. It was a breath, cold, intentional. Then came the whisper. Not words exactly, more like the memory of words, stripped of shape but not of weight. They slid into her ears like smoke. Evelyn. She jerked back, heart pounding. The journal slipped from her hand and fell into the wet leaves. Her name. It had said her name. She looked around. The forest stood still. No movement, no figure behind her. Only that impossible voice rising from the black below. She retrieved the journal with trembling hands and opened it to the last marked page. There, taped beside the entry, was a scrap of yellowed paper folded into quarters. She peeled it loose and unfolded it. It was a map again, but this one was different. It showed a hollow in the earth beneath the well. A chamber, circular. No details, no measurements, just a single line connecting it to the chapel by a hidden tunnel. She stared at it, trying to make sense of the implications. Had Margaret found something below? Had she entered it? Her eyes dropped to a small note scribbled in the margin. It listens from below. If it speaks your name, do not answer, even in thought. Evelyn backed away from the well. Her instincts screamed to leave, to run, but something held her there. Not fear, at least not entirely. It was a compulsion, a connection. She felt it in her chest, like a string being gently tugged. Before she turned to go, she looked one last time into the well's abyss. A flicker of motion danced at the edge of vision, like something shifting just below the surface. A shape. A face. No, not quite. It wasn't looking up at her. It was looking through her. She turned and walked quickly back to the house, breath sharp in her lungs. The forest no longer felt still. It pulsed with awareness. When she returned, Father Alcott stood on the porch. "You went to the well," he said, voice hard. She didn't respond. "You should not have. I had to. You're being drawn in." "I'm being pulled in," she corrected. "And you've done nothing but lie." "I've protected what I could," he snapped, "but you opened it the moment you read her name aloud." Evelyn stared at him. "I didn't read it aloud." The priest's eyes narrowed. "You did. In your mind. That's enough." She stepped past him into the house, heart pounding with more than fear now. Anger. Betrayal. That night, she sat by the fire again, journal open on her knees. She had found something at the well, and it had found her. Evelyn waited until nightfall. The house felt different again, as if it had shifted around her while she was gone. Shadows seemed to lean toward her instead of away. The hallway smelled of damp stone and something sharper. Old smoke, maybe, or incense long burned. She approached the study with steady steps, the journal pressed tightly against her side. Father Alcott was there, seated by the fire with his hands folded. He didn't look at her when she entered. The room was warm, but Evelyn shivered as she stood near him. "I know what's beneath the chapel," she said. He didn't respond. "The tunnel, the well, the room below." Still silence. "You knew Margaret didn't leave this house." Now he turned to her, slowly, as if every motion had to be considered, measured and weighed against some invisible ledger. "No," he said. "She didn't." Evelyn sat across from him, eyes locked. "You buried her." He nodded once. "Not in the way you think. She died here, didn't she?" "She was taken." Evelyn frowned. "Taken by what?" Alcott leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. "By something that had been promised her. Something bound to this land before we ever claimed it with crosses or names. A hunger sealed with a vow. She was the last in the line of those who broke it." Evelyn opened the journal and pointed to the final page. "She wrote that you said her name after she begged you not to." "I did." "Why?" "She asked me to swear. I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, because I wasn't allowed." He stood and walked to the window. Rain had returned, soft, steady. It ran in rivulets down the glass like veins. "I was young," he continued, "newly ordained. I thought I could reason with it, that faith could tame what the old ones feared." "What is it?" Alcott turned, and his expression was hollow. "It's not a demon, not a ghost. It doesn't want to be known. It wants to be named. Once spoken, it roots itself in the name, in the voice that utters it, and in the ear that hears it. That's how it survives." Evelyn's skin prickled. "Margaret tried to undo the pact," he said. "She thought she could end the hunger by returning what her ancestors buried. She didn't realize that naming it, acknowledging it, was the very thing that feeds it." Evelyn's breath caught. "And you—" I tried to stop her, but it had already begun. The night she confronted me in the chapel, the name was already in her thoughts, and when she begged me not to speak it, I realized too late that it was listening. "You spoke her name?" "Yes." Evelyn felt the room darken. "She screamed once," Alcott said, voice thin, "and then she was gone. Not in body, but in presence. Her voice was taken, her memory, frayed." I sealed the journal, locked the attic, and I've kept the house quiet ever since. "You lied to everyone. I protected them. You imprisoned her. I kept her from being erased." The fire cracked, sending a single ember upward. "She's still here," Evelyn whispered. "She touched me. I felt her. She's bound between the breath of a word and the silence of the grave. And now that you've read her name, it's listening again." Evelyn stood, the journal heavy in her hands. "What happens if someone says it aloud?" Alcott's gaze hardened. "Then what was promised will come to collect." Neither of them spoke for a long time. Outside, thunder rolled once, low and distant. In the quiet that followed, Evelyn felt something shift again. Not in the walls, in her. Something had heard her voice. It happened in silence. On the morning of February 11th, 1937, the town awoke to the scent of smoke, sharp, bitter, clinging to the frost-bitten air like judgment. By then the fire had already consumed the southern ridge, leaping from tree to roof to field with a hunger that didn't belong to flame alone. No one saw where it started, Some claimed lightning. Others whispered sabotage, but the truth was older, deeper. Margaret Hale's house was the first to burn. Neighbors remembered seeing her the night before, pacing outside her porch, hair loose, journal in hand, murmuring something to the sky. One woman swore Margaret had lit a candle and held it to the wind, daring it to choose her. The fire began in the attic. It moved too quickly, unnatural, deliberate. When the townsfolk arrived, drawn by the rising pillar of smoke, the roof had already caved in. Flames bled down the walls like veins. The garden, untouched by frost for years, shriveled instantly. No body was ever found. They searched through the night. By morning, only blackened timber and scorched stone remained. But beneath the ash, something stranger survived, a section of floor that hadn't burned. At the center, a symbol remained intact, a circle within a circle, crossed once, the mark of the well. Father Alcott was there. Some say he wept. Others say he stared, expressionless, as if waiting for something to rise from the soot. The church bell rang once that afternoon, though no hand touched the rope. That year the crops thrived again. Children were born healthy. The river ran higher than usual, feeding the soil with cold, clear water. But no one celebrated. They rebuilt the house the following spring, board by board, using timber from elsewhere. But they never touched the attic. That space remained sealed, nailed shut from within, and no one asked why. Some say the fire was a sacrifice, Margaret offering herself to seal what she had broken. Others claimed she never died, that she wandered the woods beyond the chapel, hair white as bone, her journal stitched into her skin, that if you heard your name whispered from the well, she was the one calling it. But Father Alcott knew better. He carried her silence like a wound. Never once did he speak her name aloud again, not in prayer, not in memory, not even when her name was etched into the graveyard stone, a false marker with no body beneath it, just a name, waiting. Evelyn read this account in a letter folded into the back of the journal, written in a different hand, formal and precise, likely one of the townspeople. The ink had faded, but the truth hadn't. She sat on the porch, the air heavy with approaching rain. Margaret's name pulsed behind her eyes, as if the pages themselves had begun to breathe it. She closed the journal carefully and looked toward the hills. The land bore no scar from the fire. It had healed too perfectly, as though the flame hadn't been punishment but payment. Inside, Father Alcott sat motionless. She approached him one last time. "You watched her burn." He didn't answer. "She tried to stop it, didn't she? And you let the town believe it was an accident." His eyes flickered with something between rage and grief. "She made a choice," he said. "No," Evelyn whispered. "You made it for her." He stood slowly, age pressing against every joint. "I tried to hold it back," he said. "But silence alone isn't strong enough." Evelyn turned away. The fire had never been meant to destroy. It had been meant to cleanse. But some things, names, promises, oaths, did not burn. They lingered. They waited. They whispered. And they remembered. The church stood still in the dusk. Evelyn stepped through the heavy wooden doors alone. Father Alcott hadn't followed. He said nothing when she took the keys from the nail by the study, nor when she whispered that she needed to see it for herself. The chapel was cold, far colder than it should have been. The air inside pressed against her skin like wet cloth. Candles lined the altar, long since unlit. She walked slowly between the pews, journal tucked under her arm, boots echoing across the old floorboards. The crawl space, Margaret had written, lay beneath the altar. She knelt behind the pulpit where the wooden paneling bore no visible seams, but with her fingers she felt it, an indentation, smooth and slightly bowed. She pressed. It opened. A narrow hatch creaked upward, revealing stone steps that descended into dark earth. She hesitated only briefly, then descended, her breath shallow and tight. The tunnel below was lined with rotting timbers and walls etched in symbols, circles, crosses, lines repeated again and again. The air smelled of clay and something older, something damp and still breathing. At the end of the passage she found it, a chamber, circular and low. The dirt floor had been packed smooth by generations of knees. At the center stood a crude altar made of blackened wood, ringed by remnants of melted wax. Bones were buried in the walls, fingers protruding from the soil like roots. One small skull rested beside a tattered rosary, and beneath the altar, a name. Not written, not carved. It was formed as if the dirt itself had shaped it, Letters coiled together like veins. Evelyn didn't read it. She felt it. In her chest, her throat. It wasn't Margaret's, it was older, more consuming. The silence deepened and then the whispers returned, faint at first, like leaves shifting. Then louder, clearer. Evelyn. She turned, heart slamming. But the chamber was empty. The voice came again. Let me rise. She fell back against the wall, breath ragged. The journal slipped from her fingers, landing open on a page she hadn't yet reached. It bore a message scrawled in frantic script. If you find this place, do not answer. It is not her voice. It is what waits beneath her. She snapped the journal shut. Footsteps echoed above, slow, steady. Father Alcott? She climbed the stairs quickly, emerging into the chapel. The hatch closed behind her with a dull thud. The church was empty, but the air had changed, lighter or maybe just emptier. She walked toward the altar, then froze. A sound, soft, unmistakable, came from beneath her feet. A whisper, low and rhythmic, rising through the floorboards in a tongue she didn't know but somehow understood. Not words, but command. She stepped back, her boot catching on a warped plank. It lifted slightly. She knelt and pried it loose. Beneath it lay a hollow, shallow and lined with stone, and inside a child's bones, small, fragile, curled into themselves. Beside them, another rosary, but this one was scorched. Its beads were black, cracked down the center, and its crucifix melted at the edges. She reached out instinctively but pulled her hand away before touching it. The chanting grew louder. She rose, breath short, and ran from the church, journal pressed to her chest, the air behind her vibrating with something hungry. As she stepped outside, the wind shifted, and from the bell tower, a sound echoed down, deep, resonant. Dong. Once. Though no rope had moved. Evelyn didn't look back. She knew now. The church hadn't been built to house salvation. It had been built to hold something in. The storm returned that night. Rain lashed the windows with a fury that seemed less like weather and more like warning. Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed, the journal on her lap, the room lit only by a single oil lamp. She had not spoken to Father Alcott since leaving the church. He hadn't tried to find her. She knew now what waited beneath the chapel, but she still didn't understand what Margaret had become. The wind howled through the eaves, and with it came something quieter, just under hearing, a hum, a name, not spoken, breathed. She stood, heart racing, and walked to the hallway. The attic door was open. No light spilled from within, and yet she could see the steps as if moonlit. Something compelled her upward, not fear this time, but a need. At the top, the attic greeted her like a breath held too long. The space was unchanged, dust, shadows, forgotten trunks, but now in the far corner a figure stood, still, pale, watching. Evelyn did not scream. The air was too heavy, too thick with familiarity. "Margaret," she whispered. The figure didn't move, but the silence answered. She stepped forward slowly. With each step, the room grew colder. Her breath fogged before her. The shape became clearer. Long hair, hands folded, eyes that had seen too much, and a voice not spoken aloud but heard nonetheless. "You opened it," Evelyn nodded. "I didn't know." "Neither did I." The voice echoed in her chest like memory. Margaret raised her hand and pointed, not to Evelyn, but to the journal. "It waits for the name. I haven't said it, but you carry it." Evelyn felt the weight of it pressing into her bones. She opened the journal, fingers trembling. The final page had changed. There in Margaret's handwriting was a new message. "If he speaks my name again, I will not return. I will vanish, and it will take what is left of me." Tears stung Evelyn's eyes. "What do I do?" she asked the spirit. "How do I stop him?" "You stop the sermon." She blinked. What sermon? But she already knew. The bell had tolled once. That meant it had begun. Margaret turned slowly, her form flickering like smoke, then fading entirely. The attic fell silent. Evelyn rushed downstairs, journal in hand. Outside, the wind screamed through the trees, bending them like reeds. The chapel bell rang again. Twice, this time. Distant but clear. Father Alcott stood on the front porch, dressed in black, eyes calm as the storm churned around him. "You're going to say it," Evelyn accused. He didn't respond. "You think sealing her away again will end this?" "I think silence is no longer enough," he said. Something else is waking. She's still here. You can free her. She was never meant to stay. Evelyn's voice broke. Then why did she come back? Alcott looked toward the chapel. Because someone remembered her. The wind shifted, and with it the air between them. You'll damn her, Evelyn said. If you speak her name, she's gone. She asked me to keep it, he replied. But I failed. Then don't fail again. For a moment, something flickered in the priest's expression. Doubt. Grief. Then it vanished. I have to begin, he said. He stepped off the porch and into the storm. Evelyn watched him go, heart pounding. The third toll of the bell rolled across the valley. Inside the house, the final page of the journal quivered, the ink bleeding across the paper as if alive. The time had come, and if Father Alcott said her name, there would be no undoing it. The church was full, not with people, but with presence. The air thrummed with a pressure that made Evelyn's ears ache as she stepped through the threshold. Candles burned at every window, their flames unmoving, as if frozen by will rather than wind. Father Alcott stood at the altar. He was dressed in full vestments, black and crimson, a book open before him. The pages were not scripture. They were older, yellowed and uneven. His lips moved in silence, as though reciting a prayer long buried. Evelyn walked down the center aisle. The pews were empty, but she felt watched. Each step closer to the altar pulled something inside her taut, like string being wound too tight. You don't have to do this, she said. Alcott looked up. His eyes were darker than before. It's begun, he replied. You came too late. You'll lose her. She was never mine to lose. The wind outside howled like a chorus. You said silence wasn't enough, Evelyn pressed. Then say nothing. Alcott's voice was flat. It's no longer my choice. Evelyn opened the journal and read aloud. If he speaks her name again, I will not return. I will vanish. And it will take what is left of me. She asked you not to say it. Alcott looked at the gathered candles, then at the shadows writhing behind them. She asked me to protect her. That's what I'm doing. No, Evelyn said. You're protecting yourself. Thunder cracked above the church. The bell rang again, 3 times. Alcott began to chant, not loud, not fast. A slow intonation, each syllable deliberate, shaped by something more than memory. The language was unfamiliar, and yet Evelyn understood its intent. It was not a prayer. It was a command. The floor beneath them groaned. I saw the bones, she said. I know what's under this place. Alcott paused. Then you know what waits if I don't finish. I know what you're afraid of. She stepped forward. Say her name, she said softly, and it ends her, but not what's beneath. He looked at her, face unreadable. I remember her, Evelyn whispered. I carried her words. I heard her voice. She's not gone. The wind slammed against the chapel doors. The candles flickered for the first time. Alcott raised his hand, trembling now, and pointed toward the bell tower. They are coming. The pact is unraveling. Let it, Evelyn said. Let it fall apart. She came back because I remembered her. If that's what keeps her here, then others will remember too. Alcott turned the page. No, she said. Don't read it. The doors burst open. But it wasn't the storm. The townspeople stood at the entrance. Old faces, men and women who had stayed silent for decades. They came without words, drawn not by invitation but by guilt, by blood, by memory. Behind them the wind died. The church fell into silence. And then, from the altar, a voice not Alcott spoke. He won't remember, but we will. The shadows behind the candles thickened. A shape emerged, tall, veiled in ash and lace, hair white, eyes hollow. Margaret. She stepped into the sanctuary barefoot, her dress torn but luminous. The crowd parted without speaking. Alcott dropped the book. It landed face down. Evelyn looked at him. It's your last chance, she said. Choose her. His mouth opened. The bell above groaned once more. The storm paused. Evelyn's heart raced. Would he say the name? Would he let her go? The answer waited in the final breath between silence and speech. The air inside the church fractured. The moment Margaret stepped fully into the sanctuary, something shifted in the walls. Paint cracked, candles hissed, the altar trembled. The congregation, silent as stone, did not flee. They knew, they remembered. She did not speak. Her gaze swept the room, not searching, but seeing. Her eyes met Evelyn's, and something passed between them. Recognition, gratitude, a final question. Evelyn nodded. Father Alcott stepped forward, face pale, hands trembling. The book at his feet remained closed. "I didn't want this," he said to Margaret, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret took another step. The hem of her dress brushed the floor with a sound like dried leaves. Her presence bent the air around her, a cold not of winter but of absence. She was not corpse, not ghost. She was memory unburied. "You asked me to keep your name," Alcott continued. "I failed." His voice cracked. "I tried to seal it, to contain what they buried with you, but you kept rising." The shadows on the walls twisted. The bell above them groaned, though it did not ring. Margaret raised her hand, not to curse, not to accuse, but to silence. Enough. Alcott's knees buckled. Evelyn stepped beside him. "She's not here to punish you. She's here to be heard." The priest looked at her, broken. "I said her name once. I thought I could bear the cost." "You never carried it," Evelyn replied. "You buried it." A sound rose beneath the floor, a rumble, not thunder. Their voice, many voices chanting beneath the earth from the bones sealed in the chapel's belly. They called not for salvation, but for recognition. Names, so many names, names buried with the pact. Margaret turned toward the congregation. No words, just her presence. One by one, the townspeople began to speak. Whispered confessions, old truths. "We watched them carry the child. I held the ash bowl. I drew the circle. I stayed quiet." The wind outside vanished. The church held its breath. Evelyn opened the journal once more. The ink on the final page had spread, forming a single phrase, "If they remember, I can rest." She handed the book to Father Alcott. He stared at it, then up at Margaret. Her hand remained outstretched, not demanding, asking. His lips trembled. "I remember." Margaret's eyes softened. Then came the sound. From the bell tower, 4 tolls, slow and deep, vibrating through bone and floor. The shadows on the walls began to dissolve, peeling back into smoke and breath. The congregation stood taller. Something had been released. The name didn't need to be spoken. It had been shared. And in that sharing, the hold it had was broken. But then, the altar cracked. A fissure opened beneath it, and a rush of freezing air rose, howling like a voice long caged. The wind that had vanished now screamed back with fury. The floor buckled, splintering outward. From the fracture came a light, pale and terrible. Margaret turned, placing herself between it and the people. She did not scream. She stood. Father Alcott dropped the book and reached for her, but his hand passed through air. Margaret's body was no longer solid. It flickered. The force beneath the altar surged, a final grasping hand from the past, trying to claim what had slipped from its grasp. And yet, the name was no longer hidden. It had been carried by many, and now it belonged to none. Evelyn stepped forward, journal in hand, and with steady voice called out, "We remember." The light flared once, then vanished. The fracture sealed, and the chapel fell still. But the bell had rung 4 times. 1 toll remained. The silence after the light vanished was deeper than darkness. Margaret remained in place, eyes closed, hands lowered. Her form flickered at the edges, like heat above fire. Neither ghost nor body, but something held between. The congregation stood in stunned stillness. No one moved, no one breathed. Father Alcott stepped forward. He looked older than ever, bent, unshaven, gaunt in the lamplight. But his eyes were steady, and when he spoke, his voice was no longer trembling. "I've held this name for decades, protected it, hidden it, buried it." He looked at Evelyn. "But she was right. I never carried it. I feared it." Margaret turned toward him slowly. He took a single step closer. Margaret Hale. The name left his mouth not as a weapon, not as an incantation, but as an offering. And with it something broke. The final toll echoed through the bell tower, 5th and final. The floor did not crack again. The wind did not rise. But the church groaned like a breath long held, and finally exhaled. Margaret's eyes opened. Tears streamed down her cheeks, clear, slow, weightless. She reached for Alcott. This time her hand touched his chest. Her fingers curled against his robes. Not piercing, not burning, soft. He collapsed to his knees, head bowed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Her touch did not judge. It forgave. Then she turned. Her gaze swept the crowd one last time, resting on each face. Some wept, others nodded. None looked away. She met Evelyn's eyes and smiled. It was small, but radiant, the kind of smile that came after release, not from joy, but from peace. Then her form folded inward like petals to ash, and she was gone. The candles blew out in unison. The bell fell silent. And the church, for the first time in over a century, was still. Evelyn rushed to Alcott's side. He breathed shallow and slow, hand clutched to his chest. "She forgave you," she said softly. He nodded. "But that doesn't undo what we did," he murmured. "It only sets her free." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted, letting the pale light of a distant moon bathe the chapel in silver. The congregation began to leave one by one, heads lowered. No words were exchanged, only nods and hands placed over hearts. They had spoken what needed speaking. They had remembered. Evelyn helped Alcott to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, his steps small. "She's at rest now," he said. "She is. But something still watches," he added. From below. Evelyn looked toward the altar. "I know." He turned to her with the last of his strength. "Then don't let us forget again." She promised him she wouldn't. Together, they stepped out into the cold. Behind them, the church no longer groaned, no longer whispered, but beneath the stone, deep in the sealed crawlspace, something ancient remained, waiting, not for a name, but for silence. And this time, the silence had a keeper. The dawn was slow to come. Mist lay thick over the valley, softening the black outlines of burned timber and the broken fence posts around the old church. Evelyn stood at the edge of the ruined graveyard, her boots sinking into the wet earth, Margaret's journal pressed to her chest. Each breath drew in the scent of damp ashes and clean rain, remnants of what had been destroyed, and a promise of what could begin again. She watched as the townspeople moved quietly through the church's remains, gathering what little could be salvaged. No one spoke of what had happened in the night, but in the way they walked, in the way they paused to lay hands on broken pews or to brush fingers over the stone foundation, Evelyn saw the change. Fear had left their eyes, replaced by something new, something heavy, yes, but lighter than what came before. Father Alcott sat beneath a bare maple tree, his coat pulled close, eyes closed as if listening to something Evelyn could not hear. She walked to him, careful, and knelt beside him in the grass. "She's gone," he said. Evelyn nodded. "But not forgotten. She'll never be forgotten now." He looked at her, searching her face for something, a reassurance maybe, or a reason to believe that what he had done mattered in the end. She offered him the journal, and for a moment he hesitated before taking it. He opened to the last page. The ink had faded. Where Margaret's final plea had once been, there was now only blankness. But as Alcott turned the page, new words bloomed on the paper, faint as morning mist. "Thank you." He smiled, tears brimming in his eyes. Evelyn stood, feeling the weight in her chest lighten at last. The church's bell, now silent, its rope frayed and useless, remained a shadow in the mist above the ruins, but Evelyn no longer felt fear at its sight. One by one, the townspeople began to drift away, returning to their homes. Some paused to thank her, not in words, but with quiet nods and hands pressed over their hearts. Alcott remained behind. "Will you stay?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head. "No, this place belongs to those who remember." She turned toward the road. The rain had ended, but water still dripped from the trees pooling along the muddy path. As she walked away, she looked back only once. The ruins of the church, the empty graveyard, the fading mist, all of it felt like an echo, soft and unfinished. Not an ending, but a beginning. Margaret's story would not be lost. Not again. And neither would the warning. As Evelyn reached the edge of the woods, she paused, heart full of both sorrow and peace. She slipped Margaret's journal into her bag and set off, steps steady, the future unknown but no longer terrifying. A gentle wind picked up, carrying with it the distant memory of a name spoken not in fear but in remembrance. The story was over, but the echoes remained. If you were moved by this haunting tale, make sure to subscribe to our channel right now. It helps us bring you more stories that linger in the mind and stir the heart. And don't forget, click on the next video showing on your screen. It's a journey even deeper into the shadows and secrets of the past. Thank you for remembering, thank you for listening. And above all, remember, some stories are meant to be shared.